In the late 1910s, Americans treated radium like a wonder of the new age. It did something no ordinary material did. It glowed on its own, steadily, without a flame. That glow quickly became a symbol of modern science made real. People did not just admire it, they trusted it. In newspapers and advertisements, radium sounded clean, advanced, and safe. It looked like progress you could hold. Businesses moved fast to turn that excitement into products. Radium was added to paints so numbers and hands could shine in the dark, a practical feature that felt almost magical. Luminous items promised convenience and safety, especially at night. The word itself became a selling point, printed proudly as proof of quality. In that moment, the risk rarely entered the conversation. The glow distracted from the question every new technology carried. The public mood rewarded confidence, not caution. Science had delivered electricity, modern medicine, and faster industry, and radium seemed to fit that same pattern. Because it was used in cutting-edge research and talked about with respect, it sounded controlled and beneficial. Companies leaned into that belief. They marketed radium as harmless, even healthy, and consumers accepted it. A dangerous idea settled in place. If it came from science, it must be safe. Demand for glowing watches rose fast, and manufacturers rushed to fill orders. Dial painting shops expanded, and hiring became a business priority. They aimed their ads and recruiters at young women, especially those who wanted steady wages without entering heavy industry. The pitch sounded simple and clean. Careful handwork, regular hours, and pay that beat many other jobs open to women at the time. Factories framed the work as modern and even prestigious. A small brush and a numbered dial looked harmless, and the glow carried a kind of status. Managers emphasized precision and speed, because each dial meant money, and each delay meant a lost contract. The women got told they had been selected for their patience and neatness, as if this had been a craft, not a risk. The promises worked. Many applicants came from families that needed the extra income, and this job sounded safer than the alternatives. Once hired, they entered a system built around output, rows of dials, strict expectations, and constant pressure to keep hands moving. The glow that sold the watches also sold the job. It offered pride, pay, and respectability right up front. Inside the workshops, the job got turned into a strict routine. Supervisors watched hands and wrists, not just for speed, but for a particular shape at the end of every stroke. The tiny brushes had to come to a sharp point to make clean numbers and thin lines. Workers had started using their lips to do it because it worked. Then, management made it the standard. The instructions sounded simple and practical. Lip, dip, paint. First, the bristles got pulled between the lips to make a fine tip. Then the brush went into the radium paint. Then it went straight to the dial. It saved seconds, and seconds mattered on a production line. But the method meant something else every single time. A little paint went into the mouth. At first, it looked harmless, even tidy, like a trick of the trade. The workers repeated it again and again, dozens, then hundreds of times a day. The mouth became part of the tool. And without anyone saying the word poison, the factory turned radium into something that got swallowed on schedule, not once, not by accident, as a normal part of doing the job right. After months at the benches, the first complaints sounded ordinary. A tooth that would not stop aching, gums that stayed sore. Then it shifted. Teeth loosened in mouths that had been healthy. Dentists pulled one, then another, expecting relief. Instead, the pain spread. The jaw itself started to feel wrong, tender in a way that did not match a simple cavity. Something deeper had taken hold. What followed scared people because it did not behave like a normal infection. Extraction sites failed to heal. Swelling returned again and again. Some women developed open sores along the gum line and a foul discharge that suggested rot, not recovery. Treatments that usually worked did little. The problem kept moving through the bone. It looked like a dental issue at first, but it acted like an unseen injury that never ended. The pattern became harder to ignore. These were young workers, not elderly patients. Yet their mouths broke down fast and their jaws weakened as if the bone had turned fragile. Families watched them lose teeth, then strength without any clear explanation. Doctors offered different names and guesses, but no simple cause fit. For the first time, the job itself started to feel like the common thread behind the sickness. The illnesses stopped looking like bad luck. One young worker fell sick, then another. Jaw infections spread, teeth loosened, simple aches turned into pain that never left. Families watched healthy daughters fade, and they started making connections the women had not been allowed to make at work. The common thread was always the same: the glowing paint, the job, the bright dust that followed them home. Doctors saw patterns they could not ignore. The damage clustered in mouths and bones, exactly where the workers handled the paint and shaped their brushes. Treatments failed, and the usual explanations did not hold. Some women grew too weak to work, some died young, and the deaths raised a new kind of alarm. Grief turned into questions. If this kept happening to dial painters, then something in that work harmed them. Suspicion spread beyond individual households. Friends compared notes. Parents pushed doctors for answers. In towns built around the factories, people started asking the question out loud. Was the luminous paint itself the cause? That shift mattered. It turned private suffering into a public worry, and it threatened the promise that radium products were safe. The women's illnesses no longer looked mysterious. They started to look connected, and that connection demanded proof. When suspicions started pointing at the luminous paint, the companies did not pause and ask what had gone wrong. They pushed back. They rejected any link between the job and the sickness, and they treated the complaints like an attack on a successful business. Paperwork and public statements leaned on one message: nothing in the factory caused harm. If the women suffered, it came from somewhere else. That denial quickly turned into blame. Some managers suggested the workers had poor hygiene, or bad teeth, or weak bodies. Others hinted the illnesses had ordinary causes, and that frightened families had overreacted. To strengthen that story, the companies leaned on experts who sounded official and confident. These factory-friendly voices claimed the paint was safe in the amounts used at work, and the danger was exaggerated. So a new conflict formed, sharper than before. On one side, women carried the evidence in their own mouths and bones, watched their health collapse, and knew it followed the job. On the other, the company line stayed firm, backed by credentials and calm explanations that dismissed what the workers lived through. The more the women worsened, the more the official story insisted they were not poisoned. Reality and authority split apart. By the time the illnesses spread, many families stayed isolated, each case treated like bad luck. Then a few of the women recognized a pattern too sharp to ignore. They compared symptoms, timelines, and the one thing they all shared: the dial painting work. Alone, they had been easy to dismiss. Together, they became harder to silence. They gathered names, medical notes, and death certificates, building a simple but powerful claim. Organizing did not magically create strength, it created risk. The companies had money, influence, and friendly professionals ready to cast doubt on the women's sickness. Workers faced pressure to stay quiet, and some were too weak to travel or even sign papers. Still, a small circle pushed forward, asking what could be proven and what could be demanded. They looked for attorneys willing to challenge a respected industry and a story the public still struggled to believe. Finding legal help became its own battle. Many lawyers hesitated, not wanting a long fight against powerful employers, or unsure the science could stand up in court. But the women kept returning with clearer records and a clearer purpose. Their suffering stopped being only personal. It became a case. Once an attorney agreed to take them seriously, the conflict shifted. The companies no longer faced rumors. They faced organized plaintiffs asking for accountability in law. The fight stopped being a quiet legal struggle and became a public matter. Hearings brought the women's stories into official records, where sworn testimony carried weight in a new way. Reporters followed, and soon the case appeared in headlines that reached far beyond the factories and the families. Public attention changed the pressure. It also changed the stakes for the companies that had insisted nothing was wrong. With attention came scrutiny, and with scrutiny came testing. Doctors and researchers started looking for something industry spokesmen could not talk around. The key discovery came from the body itself. Radium did not behave like an ordinary chemical that passed through and disappeared. It acted like calcium. It settled into bones, stayed there, and kept damaging tissue from the inside. The evidence did not rely on rumor or sympathy anymore. Scientific results linked radium exposure to bone injury in a direct, measurable way, matching what the women's bodies had shown for years. That connection made the denials harder to hold. It turned the case into more than one company's problem. It raised a wider question the public could understand. If radium harmed bone, how many workers had been put at risk? Once the testing linked radium to the damage inside their bodies, the fight shifted into a legal endgame. The women pressed their claims while companies weighed what a trial could expose. Quiet deals started to look safer than loud verdicts. Settlements followed, and they brought money, but also something rarer, official acknowledgement that the work itself had harmed them. Those agreements did not erase what happened, but they changed what employers could pretend. Compensation and medical support became part of the record, and that record mattered. It told other workers that this was not bad luck or personal weakness, it was a job hazard. Corporate responsibility stopped being a moral argument and became a legal risk companies had to manage. Reforms came in behind the settlements, and they reset expectations for radiation work. Safer handling practices and limits on exposure gained force, and the idea of protecting workers moved closer to a requirement than a suggestion. The factories operated in a different world than the one that hired those young women. The cost of ignoring safety had become measurable, public, and punishable. Years later, the Radium Girls did not sit in history as a strange footnote. They became a dividing line. Before them, workplaces often treated new chemicals like miracles first and hazards like someone else's problem later. Radium had fit that pattern perfectly. It had seemed clean, modern, even healthy. The women had been asked to use it with their mouths as if it belonged there. That belief had carried a cost. What made their story stick was how clearly it exposed the gap between a product's promise and a worker's reality. The glow sold hope to customers, but the process placed danger inside the body day after day. The lesson had been simple and brutal. Harm did not need to look violent to be real. A routine could kill. And when companies controlled the information, the people at the bench paid first. In the decades that followed, their names came to represent something bigger than radium and watch dials. They stood for the idea that a job never counted as safe just because a boss said so, or because the science sounded impressive. Their suffering helped push occupational health toward proof, testing, and protection. It also left a warning that lasted. When a workplace asked workers to treat poison like a tool, tragedy followed.